Today on CityCast Philly, the city landed a huge honor. We're officially certified welcoming, a title given by Welcoming America, a national nonprofit that promotes economic opportunities for immigrants. But what does this certification actually mean for the city and our immigrant communities? It's Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Amy Eusebio, you're the executive director of the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Haven't we, as in the city, haven't we always been welcoming to immigrant communities?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the city of Philadelphia has very much been a welcoming city for immigrant communities I'd say, for probably even a couple of decades. But I think what we've learned, even through this recent process, is like there's different depth of welcoming, right? And on a continuum, right? Like you never like fully arrive. And so this is kind of like our most recent iteration of like getting further along that continuum to being more welcoming for immigrant communities.
Why are we getting this certification now?
So the Office of Immigrant Affairs became a permanent city office in 2019. And we really set out to kind of examine how to set a strategic plan around immigrant inclusion and immigrant integration. And then a pandemic happened. And so all plans went left. It went really to crisis response.
Yeah.
But honestly, in a way, during that time, I think the crisis of COVID for many communities of color, for many communities experiencing any level in inequity, it really brought things to a focus. It's like, are we going to keep people alive or not? And so I think even things like language access and the way racial inequities play out, like in real time, really came to a head. And we were more willing to experiment with new kinds of programs, new kinds of outreach. And so at the beginning of 2022, I applied to begin the process with Welcoming America for us to become certified welcoming. It was a year-long process because they require us, well, one, they had to do technical assistance to us to orient us to something they call the welcoming standard that has like 7 different areas of what does it mean to be a welcoming city. Things like government leadership, education, economic development, with very specific indicators of like, do you have a program that ensures immigrant victims of crime know their rights?
Interesting.
So very, very detailed things. We had to complete a self-assessment. We had to provide evidence of our compliance with these indicators. And then they did an external review of that, including 3-day on-site audit back in November.
Yeah, so Amy, they basically did an audit of our city policies and services that are happening right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, how did we fare? We fared okay, right?
We fared very well. I'm not going to front. I got nervous because as you started, with this podcast, I'm like, oh, well, we are a very welcoming city. We have a number of really amazing initiatives, some longstanding, some newer and more innovative. But when I started this process, I was confident we would come out well. And then once I got into the nitty-gritty details of each of the indicators, I'm like, ooh, these are because we might, for example, I was introduced to a term earlier this week, policy placebo. So sometimes we might have a policy in place, but is it actually being enforced? And is it being enforced consistently? Or does it require having a champion inside a particular city agency to make sure that a policy is actually moving forward? So it's been really interesting. I myself, as a daughter of immigrants, I'm like, there's things I know anecdotally, but even this process has been really interesting to kind of push further to really think about inclusive policy and inclusive programming. I think it comes off as like City of Philadelphia, almost as if like it's the government, right? The municipal government side of things. But it really isn't. What really struck me was that we accomplished the certification because it really does take all of us. Some of the programs that were highlighted in our certification report include things that are being led by different nonprofit organizations, different immigrant leaders, like innovative stuff happening on the ground that then the city becomes aware of and might support. But it was just a really beautiful moment. And actually, one of my partners earlier this week highlighted, we, especially as immigrant leaders, this is Wofi Jabate of the African Cultural Alliance of North America, ACANA, an organization based in Southwest Philadelphia. He's like, we just do the work. We just do the work and we, meet with city departments to advocate for the needs of our community. And it wasn't until he was sitting in the interview for the certification audit and sharing about his work that he realized, like, we've come a really long way. Like, we've made so many gains over, again, like the decades.
There are so many varying communities as well, and each community is different and unique in its own way. So how do you kind of run this certification audit, so to speak, and make sure that you include everyone?
I have to say, from the moment I started in this role, that has been the biggest challenge and like the ongoing challenge. In the city of Philadelphia, we have our immigrant population is roughly 15% of the city's population, so just over 230,000 residents. And that's foreign born. That doesn't even include like children of immigrants who have a lot of adjacent related issues. But if you just take the foreign born population, the diversity is so vast.
Right.
I'm talking about if even like one, of course, like countries of origin, we run the gamut, right? We have Latin American communities, Asian Pacific Islander communities, African and Caribbean communities. We have a growing Eastern European community, or some people might call it Eurasian community. There's different terminology that gets utilized, but it's growing communities, right? So there's countries of origins, then there's languages spoken, religions practiced, and even things like education and income levels. So that's one of my favorite data points to share. According to a Pew report from 2018, the immigrant community is literally in thirds. About 1/3 of the immigrant community in Philadelphia is highly educated with advanced degrees from their countries of origin. Mm-hmm. About 1/3 has a high school diploma, and about 1/3 has less than a high school diploma. Those are totally different needs when you think about like if each of them are the breadwinners in their family, right? From things like workers' rights and day labor issues to getting accreditation of international degrees, like totally different issues. And so one of the benefits of the certified welcoming process, one of the areas in which we did not comply with their standard is having a welcoming plan or like a community-wide integration plan. And so that's actually one of our charges on the heels of this.
Yeah, and speaking of that, across the state, our sister city, Pittsburgh, is also a welcoming city. I read that they have a welcoming Pittsburgh roadmap, so to speak. It spells out, the steps that the city is taking to be more welcoming. They have things like translating key city documents, creating more youth programs. And so with that, how will Philly develop our own citywide plan? Does it require other agencies and departments to kind of get on board and help your office?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I actually coordinate very closely and have a great relationship with my counterparts in Pittsburgh. So shout out to Faye over there and her team. But yeah, they have what I think is a really neat roadmap. And so I'm actually, one of my charges is to learn a little bit about what process they went through in order to develop their roadmap. But what I envision is an opportunity to bring together city departments and city leaders, as well as immigrant leaders, nonprofit leaders, even private sector as well, because I think one of the areas that came out of our audit was that an area of opportunity was to better include the business community, the corporate community. And it makes total sense because as we think of things like workforce development and how do we better develop those pipelines? And I think it takes all of us. And so what I envision in the coming months is us bringing together different stakeholders to figure out what are those top goals and priorities, and what role people want to play in the development of that plan, and not just developing the plan, but carrying it out and actually implementing it.
And because you mentioned that, what are some of the other more pressing needs for immigrant communities?
I'd say there's some needs that are across the board, and then there are other needs that might be specific to particular communities, or may present in nuanced ways in different communities. Across the board, for sure, access to employment and thriving wages is an issue for all immigrant communities, regardless of education levels, because of different barriers, whether it be people who do not yet have work authorization for whatever reason, or people who might have a professional expertise that they're unable to utilize because their degrees are not being acknowledged. But then there's things that really impact all residents of Philadelphia, but just manifest differently in immigrant communities. So issues of public safety, for example. There has been an increase. Immigrant communities are living all over Philadelphia, and are also being impacted by gun violence, by children being impacted by bullying. It looks a little bit different in different communities. So, for example, over the last 2-3 years with COVID pandemic and increasing perception of China virus, the Asian community in Philadelphia has really felt an uptick in violent, not just crimes, it's not always a crime, but even bias incidents against them from other Philadelphia residents, right? Similar issues too, different communities live in different neighborhoods too. So there's all kinds of immigrant communities in the Northeast. There's some communities in South Philly, some in Southwest, and all of them experience public safety in a different way. And then education becomes a big, and I'd say health issues too, are both big areas, because education and health systems need to sensitize to the needs of immigrant communities, right? Basic things like language access, but then even deeper things like just cultural sensitivity and how people might present or share, right, taking it seriously and investigating it. Again, so much gets lost when language access is not provided. If folks are not speaking English, or they might speak English, but a very basic English. So there's an assumption that the person is understanding because they might be having a conversation with you, but it doesn't mean that they understand medical terminology in English.
Right.
So those are some of the issues too that I expect to be reflected in a community-wide plan.
I read that I read that on the Welcoming Center website, and about how it's not just about opportunities too, it's about integration as well, or an understanding from both sides, whether you've born and raised in Philly to, you recently came, just understanding each other in a better way. Going back to the certification, Amy, could Philly ever lose its welcoming status?
Yes. So the certification lasts 3 years, and we will be expected to recertify. We would have to begin the process in 2025 in order to retain our certification. But if we don't go through the process of recertification, we would lose our certified welcoming designation. I could not imagine anyone letting that lapse. I hope, we have enough community accountability to hold city accountable.
Amy Eusebio, Executive Director of the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs, thank you so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
Thank you for inviting me, Trinae.
To get updates from the Office of Immigrant Affairs, go to phila.gov/OIA. We'll have a link in our show notes. And here's what else Philly's talking about. Governor Josh Shapiro delivered his first budget address yesterday. According to Spotlight PA, Shapiro's $44.4 billion proposal includes new spending for public schools and student services, permanent funding for public defenders, and preserving some pandemic-era benefits like free school breakfast for all students, among other things. The spending deal would need to be approved by June 30th. Back in Philly. Today is Joe Frazier Day, named after Philly's smoking Joe Frazier, who knocked out Muhammad Ali on March 8th, 1971. According to the Philadelphia Tribune, Frazier and Ali were both undefeated heavyweight champions, but it was Frazier who prevailed in the 15th round. Now, council member Kenyatta Johnson, along with Frazier's family, will honor him at 3 p.m. at Xfinity Live in South Philly. Frazier's statue is also outside of Xfinity Live. This event is free and open to the public. And Nick's Roast Beef, located on Cotman Avenue in Northeast Philly, has closed. According to 6ABC, owners said they weren't able to reach a lease agreement with the landlord. This location had been open since the early 1970s. The Nick's on Woodhaven Road will stay open. It's time for the tip of the day, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. Are you trying to start a garden or a compost pile and want some free stuff? The Fairmount Park Organic Recycling Center, located at 3850 Ford Road, gives out free mulch, compost, and wood chips. Philly residents can get up to 30 gallons of free organic materials. If you have a tip of the day, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed the show, share this with a family member. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter too. It's called Hey Philly. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye. A national